Thank you. This is daunting, but I'm so humbled and grateful to be asked to return here. You are the people that carried us through the darkest times when we couldn't find our way. And I have many friends here who I can't express my gratitude. We wouldn't have ever made it alone. I have watched police officers in tears with sad endings and with hearts full when a child is recovered alive. With humility, they've shared that joy. I've watched a bit of the journey that you go on, but I find it sad that seldom are you called out for the amazing work that you do every day when you get up and put your socks on and head out into a world of troubled people. Nobody calls 911 when they're having a good day. And that's the response that we know you're stepping into. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been a long journey. I was in Sioux Falls at a conference a couple months ago, and it was sponsored by a pharmaceutical company who hosted a reception for us, and the woman who was in charge was getting ready to retire after 28 years of working with this pharmaceutical company, and it hit me so deeply. That was her entire career. That's how long I've been searching for Jacob. It put it in a frame that made it more understandable to me. It's been a very long journey. I'd like you to know Jacob. My husband, Jerry, is a chiropractor, and I was lucky enough to be a stay-at-home mom. Our house was the local hangout for all of the kids. We had 4 children, and they would all have at least one friend over each. So it was always really busy, and it was always very fun. We love skits, crafts, lemonade stands. We held a garage sale to help with the famine in Ethiopia. We were the We Are the World era. It was an innocent time with tremendous amounts of joy. I want to show a skit of Jacob playing Jerry, my husband, on a Father's Day skit when it's hard to understand the kids because they're little, but Trevor broke a window. Carmen was having a picnic with her friend Candace, and she spilled grape juice all over the rug. And you'll see Jacob being Jerry.
I'm tired after long days of work, but have some patience.
Great. Well, the kids would like to talk to you about a few things that happened today.
Okay. Daddy, what? Today when I was playing ball, I hit a ball and it accidentally broke the window. That's okay. We'll buy a new one. Daddy, I had a picnic with Candace and the rug. I ripped to all over the rug. Well, that's all right. I'm sure you helped Mom clean it up. Dad, when I was fixing my hair this morning, I accidentally dropped a brand new hair dryer. Well, that's okay. We'll buy a new one when we get the window. Well, Dad, today I was having so much fun, I forgot to tape the game. You what? I forgot to tape your basketball. I'm so angry. You're grounded for 2 weeks. No.
The end. Happy Father's Day.
Happy Father's Day. From all of us. From all of us. From all of us. From all of us. Say it. Happy Father's Day from Mom too. From the whole family, even Ollie, even Polly and Petey, even Oliver, even Polly and Petey and Amy.
Those are my children. It was a few years later, but the impact of Jacob's abduction hit everybody. Everybody knows about the mom, and they can cry and share our tears, and they know about Trevor was with Jacob, but the impact on Amy and Carmen and Jerry often gets overlooked. October 22nd was a really busy day. We had the kids, Jerry took Jacob fishing, and I took Trevor to buy shoes. We watched the Vikings win their game. That doesn't always happen. We got back, then they wanted to go to skate because they were trying out for hockey practice. And at the very last minute, we went over to a friend's house. I co-chaired an art festival. We asked Jacob to babysit. He was 11, which if I had a do-over, that sounds so young, but he was in 6th grade, almost 12, and very responsible. We were only going to be gone a few hours. We ordered a pizza, left, got to our friend's house, and called home to give the kids the phone number. Trevor called shortly after, said, "We're bored. There's nothing to do. Can we ride our bikes to the store and rent a video?" My first instinct was to say no, just find something to do. And Trevor said, "Let me talk to Dad." So then Jerry said he barely got a chance to say anything. They got a white sweatshirt on Aaron. Jacob had the flashlight. Jacob was wearing, the jogging vest, and Trevor had the flashlight. They'd go straight to the store, come straight back. And he said it should be okay. And I really believe that's what we've been fighting for. It should have been okay. They called another time. I don't know how many of you are parents, but this was the 3rd time we talked to our kids since we left that night. And they said, "Carmen doesn't want to go with. Is it okay if we get a babysitter, if Rochelle comes over to watch Carmen?" These are responsible kids. They went to the store, they got a video, they got some candy, and on the way back, they were a half a mile from our house when a masked man with a gun just showed up on the road. He said, "Stop, put out the flashlight, I have a gun." They did as they were told. He told them to lie down in the ditch or he would shoot. They did that. Then he asked their ages. He never asked their names, but Trevor was 10, Aaron 11, Jacob 11. He told Trevor to run into the woods as fast as he could or he would shoot, and Trevor took off. He looked at Aaron's face, and then he said the exact same words to Aaron. But as Aaron was leaving, he saw the man grab Jacob's shoulder, and when Aaron caught up to Trevor and they felt safe enough to turn around and look back, they were gone. Nobody saw the man's face. They didn't hear a car door slam or a car engine start up. They didn't see a car. They ran home and said, "Call 911. Somebody took Jacob." The babysitter first called her dad. I'm sure it took him 20 seconds to run next door. He called us, and then he called 911. The police arrived at that corner of the cornfield within 6 minutes. Thank you. I forgot I have a clicker. It is in the middle of nowhere, but within 6 minutes, they were at the site, and it was a rookie police officer. He'd only been with the department a few months, but he responded well. He asked a lot of questions. They took Trevor and Aaron back to the crime scene so they'd know exactly where it was. We managed to make it home. It began the largest manhunt that Minnesota has ever known. It is a search that continued all the way till last fall. Having a missing child is heartbreaking. So many people, it's like, I can't imagine how you feel. And that is true. You really can't imagine. And I'm just going to ask that when you're working with parents, don't judge us, because nobody tells you how you're supposed to respond, and every family's different, what kind of support and resources you have. And we were lucky. We had tremendous support. But I learned things that I didn't know. The number one motive for kidnapping is for sexual purposes. Who would do that? It was totally out of my realm of consciousness. I couldn't understand. You must have thought we were really naive when asking questions. Is there anybody who liked Jacob too much, wanted to take him places, wanted to buy him gifts, spend time with them? I'm thinking, you're describing a nice person. I didn't get that. So while you're asking these questions, you are educating the family to an area, a topic that most of us know little about. Most kids are victimized by someone they know or somebody who knows the family, at least casually. They asked the boys, "Are you sure you weren't playing with a gun? Just Jacob got hurt and you're afraid to tell us?" Are you sure Jacob didn't run away? The older the child is, the more likely it is to assume that they ran. But our kids were absolutely adamant about, no, there was a man with a gun. There's a sense of powerlessness that comes with being a victim pretty much of any crime, but especially this one. We couldn't search. We didn't know anything about this type of crime. We were told most kids are found because somebody sees their picture on TV. We didn't have all of the gifts that Emily has talked about. That actually, we found a donor to make sure that all of the police stations would have a fax machine. That's how far back we go. You have way more tools. But we did use the media, and most families will use the media because that's one thing we can do. I was in shock. I mean, literally, I see pictures back then, I'm like staring into La La Land. But my husband worked with the media, and we begged for answers. We begged for people to come forward. The sad reality is, after a short time period, about 50 people turned him in because they didn't like the way he looked on TV. He wasn't sad enough. It didn't cry. He wasn't angry. He was just trying to hold it together for this family, but he was done at that point. So he turned it over to me, and we worked very closely with the media. And I have to say that they were our partner in all of this. They aren't the enemy. They are a means of getting things out, and they were very responsible, and they truly wanted to help all the way till the end. They played a huge role. The entire community is rocked to the core. People turned in every suspicious activity. It was kind of the original, if you see something, say something. And we were asking for that. Please, I felt somebody knows something. I begged for help. Please call and help us find Jacob. As a result, we had over 40,000 leads that first year. That the triaging that had to happen to sort everything out was phenomenal. We had the National Guard, search and rescue dogs, the Tri-County Major Crime Unit, the BCA, the FBI, St. Joe PD, Stearns County Sheriff's Department, and I just can say one thing about that collaboration that several people have mentioned. That's how it works. That's how it has to work. I didn't know anything about these different agencies. All I could look at these people and say, are you looking for Jacob? Are you part of the team? You have to check your egos at the door. It's not about you or your department. It is pulling together for that child. I remember the sheriff in the next county was part of the Tri-County Major Crime Unit, and he would call me from time to time and say, how you doing, kid? And I'm like, Frank, I'm tired. I don't know what to do. And he would yell at me, seriously. What do you mean you're tired? Who the hell's going to find Jacob if you quit? Get up. And it was absolutely, that stayed with me forever. Jacob needed me to get out of bed. And I remember being curled up in a ball and saying, I can't do this. It's too hard. It hurts too much. And I would see Jacob curled up in a ball somewhere saying the same thing. I can't do this, it's too hard, they're never gonna find me. And I got out of bed, and some days that was as much as I could accomplish, was to get out of bed, but it was because of law enforcement coaching us on. At one point, two of the BCA, our State Crime Bureau agents, came and talked to Jerry and I. They could see that we were struggling as a couple, and they wanted to make sure that Jacob had a family to come home to, and they suggested that we needed some counseling. I have had a lot of counseling, which helped me tremendously. Marriage counseling, not so much. I think marriage is hard on a good day, and this was not a good day. It took a very long time for our family to find its way back to the core. But at some point, I made a really conscious decision. I refused to let the man who took Jacob take anything else. You can't have my marriage. You can't have my family. You can't have my other kids. We will survive this. And that was that battle between me and the guy that carried me many, many times. But it was also the salvation of having so many people such as yourselves on our side. The FBI headed our case. We had one family contact who promised me that we wouldn't find out anything new through the media, which was a really big safety valve for me. He would call twice a day, once after the morning briefing and once after the evening briefing. Sometimes it was very late at night. But in our world that had suddenly no structure, it gave me a foundation. And it mattered. In February of 1990, they found a body of a young boy in the river in St. Paul, and they sent an agent to Jerry's office to bring him home. And we waited out a very, very long day to find out that it wasn't Jacob. And then, you're overwhelmed with, but it's always followed by, but who is it? Sadly, somebody had robbed a grave, and anyway, it wasn't a new victim. It was somebody doing something horrible. But it was nice to know, because the media was at that bridge. They were at that part of the river. So it was nice to get the information from you first. Hunters often would call in when they discovered bones. There were sightings. This woman in Illinois was convinced she saw Jacob, and she would call and send cards on a regular basis. We had people calling saying they were Jacob. We had somebody calling from the Jacob Javits building in New York, and it was comforting to know that lead got followed through. They didn't find who did that. A few years ago, my husband was at work when somebody called saying they were Jacob, and he had patience, but he was talking to this man who just said he looks just like him. His girlfriend says he looks just like him. He doesn't remember much of his youth, and he traveled all over. Jerry said, well, if it is you, Jake, your mom's going to want to talk to you. So he got the number, and he called me, and I called Stearns County, and just as you were saying, I thought, I want the whole CSI on this one. We're going to do a 3-way call, and, but the captain was out on the western part of Stearns County, and you couldn't even hear her, much less a 3-way. But I called this man back, and he really believes that he's Jacob, and I asked him, can you make it to the police station at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning? I'll find you a ride if you need a ride. And he said no, he would be there. And then I called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I called our sheriff back. I called the police chief of that place where he said he was from, and affirmed that, please don't take this as a prank. He thinks he's Jacob, and I need to know. I was on my way to a Child Find conference, and for that full day, I kept thinking, it could be. It could be. We found out the next day that it wasn't, but this man doesn't know who he is. He's now a ward of the state, and for months afterwards, I'd go home, and on our voicemail, he'd have a little voice saying, Mom, Dad, is it you? It's difficult. Meanwhile, we had our 3 other kids. Carmen just wanted to go to school and be in 2nd grade and be a real kid, but everybody had seen us on TV, and so they'd swarm around her and want to be her best friend, and she just wanted it to be normal. Our oldest daughter was 13, and she went to school, and nobody knew what to say, so nobody talked to her all day. She had the opposite thing. And Trevor grew up, well, he didn't want to go to school at all. What difference does a spelling test make when your brother's missing? He wouldn't go. I asked him last year, how did I get you to go back to school? And he said, you paid me. I guess it worked, because he did graduate from college. I didn't know I would try anything, and there's no rules. It's not like you can call up your neighbor and have them say what they did for help. One evening, we were ready to go out for dinner, and some woman called and said, he's at 606 East Minnesota Street. They'll be there for 10 minutes. And Jerry and Trevor jumped in the car and went down there, and the police arrived, and this woman was standing there believing that Jacob was in that house, and she was escorted to the VA hospital. But sometimes when people call, they're so convinced, and they're convincing. And then Jerry and Trevor came home, and we went out to dinner. And I was talking with my kids last week, and it's like, that became the norm for our family. We don't really even know what a normal family goes through. But when everybody went back to work or school, I really had nowhere to go. I worked with law enforcement closely, asking, what do you need? And they kept suggesting sex offender registry would be helpful. We would like to know who was in the area. So we fought for that in Minnesota and nationally. And it is an amazing tool for law enforcement, but there are many challenges with it, how it's managed and who's on and who's not. So I'm just going to suggest you not get stuck on any one tool. I'm hoping that by the end of this week, you're going to have a garage full of tools and a lot of people to call with contacts. We had at the end of the day probably 6 suspects that they couldn't rule in or out, but not one of them was on a registry, that not one of them had ever been arrested for that type of crime, but clearly it was a need to know, and it did clear a lot of people quickly. Please call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children when you have a missing child. It's 1-800-THE-LOST. You can carry that in your head. They're amazing. That's all they do. And when you do one thing, you get really good at it. In 1990, the recovery rate was in the 60s. Now it's over 97.5% or something like that. Missing kids come home. That hope is real. And as a searching parent, you're never going to give up. It's kind of like if you have an illness and 1% survives, you're going to want to be that 1%. We knew it was small, but it was possible. We worked with the Office of Justice and Delinquency to set up a parent-to-parent mentoring program, which we call Team Hope, and that is a group of parents who they're searching. They've gone through some training. They can assist other families. We started with about 24 families that we pulled together to get that rolling, and now they've worked with probably over 75,000 families. You can connect parents with other parents who know how to survive, know how to work with the media, know what to do with their other siblings. It's a phenomenal, phenomenal program. Hope is real. It's not something that you just sort of ponder. It was part of it is still, I guess, part of every fiber of my being. I know that kids can come home. My favorite story was a couple that was traveling. They thought they were from Minnesota. They were in Florida, and they thought they saw Jacob. He looked scared. He looked nervous. He looked like he didn't want to be with this guy. They didn't know who to call, so they called the FBI in Minneapolis. When they described the man that this boy was with, the FBI agent knew who they were talking about. This guy's kidnapped kids before. Now's who's he got. They caught up with them in Flagstaff, Arizona, and clearly it wasn't Jacob. But one 12-year-old boy got to go home because somebody was aware of the problem. They saw a suspicious situation. It just didn't look right. They trusted that instinct, and they called the police. Most people stop at that last step. They don't call. But we encourage people, if you see something that looks unusual involving a child, stick up for the child. If it were your child, you'd want somebody sticking up for them. That's how missing kids come home. I started a scrapbook of news articles on kids who came home early on, but eventually over time I was lucky enough to meet many of them. And I have this clicker that they told me. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about Jared. This slide probably belongs later in the presentation, but one of the things that really mattered at the end towards the resolution of our case was the fact that came up in the beginning, and don't overlook this. Are there other similar crimes in the area? Jared was living in Cold Spring, which is 10 miles away from us. He was abducted. The guy threatened to have a weapon. He was sexually abused and then dropped off a couple miles from home. He was returning from hockey practice. He was somewhat believed, and he did a composite drawing. In the next slide, this was only about 5 miles from our house. The medical doctor's son, it was an attempted abduction, and the kid got away. But he described, the person who tried to take it. We don't know for sure if it was the same guy, but how many people are there out there that are going after young boys? And in Painesville, We don't know exactly how many victims, but this came out later. A blogger was doing some research, and she found out in 1987 there were several boys who were attacked when they were biking together, and this guy would snatch one of them off and sexually molest them and then release them. It was always at night. They were near their homes. He wore a mask. He threatened them. This also became a factor. Now, back to the kids who came home. I'm sorry, I jumped out of order. Ben Ownby and Sean Hornbeck, when they found Ben, they found Sean had been kidnapped 4 years earlier. Elizabeth Smart, I had met her parents while they were searching, and I knew she was alive and out there, and they did too. J.C. Dugard, I got to meet. I love J.C.'s work now. She works with other families and offers support. I met her mom when we were both searching early on, and when I got to meet J.C., it was so phenomenal. It was a very long time that she was gone, and after Jacob was found, J.C. sent a message through the National Center inviting our family to go to their ranch to heal. The 360 of it all was amazing. I will do that. I haven't yet. I got to meet Amanda and Gina. Just this spring, I met Saru Brierly, whose name you probably don't know so much, but he is the author of the book that became Lion. He was lost when he was 5 years old. He was on the streets of Calcutta and, on his own, wandering around. He moved to another continent, and yet 25 years later, found his mom. It is a phenomenal story. I know these kids are out there and they are miraculous when they happen, but as a searching parent, we know it could happen. I was chair of the board for the National Center, as they said, for 3 years, and they gave me this plaque, which is in my living room. During that 3-year time period, 11,654 kids, missing kids, came home. They do come home. Hope is real, it's alive, and we will carry it in our hearts forever. We can never, never give up. We lived through some extraordinary times, but nothing would have prepared us for last fall. Years passed, and Jerry and I, it started before last fall. Jerry and I didn't want to go through a 25th anniversary. We didn't know what to do. We were out of ideas. How do you honor this date? We went to the sheriff and said, where's the team? We had such a big team at the beginning, and no offense, but you guys have had it for a really long time. Can we bring back the team? I wanted the FBI, the BCA, the Major Crime Unit. I wanted the Cold Case Review. I wanted the National Center Cold Case Review. I wanted all of that, but it relied on the sheriff agreeing to do that. So he hosted a meeting and invited everybody there, and the big takeaway from that was the FBI said that they could offer the CARD team. I think it's Child Abduction Response Deployment or something like that. But they offered to bring a CARD team to review the case, and I was so grateful because I knew about them from a lot of these trainings. But the person that they wanted to bring had some health issues, so it didn't happen right away. Meanwhile, there was a lot going on in our community. We had a blogger who'd been writing about Jacob. She's the one who found those other cases. And, sorry, that's not where we want to be. Can you reverse it one? There, we'll just leave it on that. The National Center Cold Case did come, and they did say these are all connected. You don't have pockets of victimization like this without having them be connected. They tried to work with the sheriff, but he was kind of locked into a different suspect and was not as receptive at that point in time. Jared was on fire. He finally shared his story. He was a victim when he was 12, and now he was an adult and he had children, and he thought, there's got to be more victims. I know I'm not the only one. And he's talked about his story, and clearly other victims came forward. Joy Baker and Jared went and spoke with these victims. Many of them didn't want to talk to police. They'd never shared their story. They've identified over 15 victims in Paynesville where that had many of them had never shared the story. But Jared was outspoken, and he was determined to help find Jacob. He believed that it was the same man that took him. John Walsh featured Jacob's story on The Hunt. The FBI sent the card team, and in 2015, in the summer, they reran Jared's clothes that he'd been wearing the night he was abducted. And technology has improved, and they connected DNA from Jared's clothing to Danny Heinrich. This is a man who had been a suspect in our case as well for a very long time, but there was no evidence on him. Sadly, the statute of limitations had run out, so Jared did no justice. Even they identified the guy, but nothing could happen. He couldn't be charged with kidnapping or sexual assault. He did file a civil suit to see if he could just get him to say that he did what he did. They conducted a search of Danny's home, and no evidence of either crime, Jacob or Jared, was found, but there were binders of child pornography. So Danny Heinrich was locked up, and in December of 2015, he was indicted on 25 counts of child pornography. An incredible amount of effort was made to try and find evidence to connect him to Jacob, but there was none. There was no evidence. And you can believe all you want that you got the guy, but with not the concrete evidence, there's no arrest. He sat in jail for 10 months. The U.S. attorney assigned 2 prosecuting attorneys it was their full-time job to, are we out of time? To find evidence, but they didn't. So what happened, we were told that they would offer a plea bargain if he was willing to talk. On August 29th of 2016, so it's almost fully 1 year ago, Jared's attorney stopped by our house and said, we believe he's willing to talk. The following day, Jerry and I went there and went to his office and met with a lot of the big players. And we were asked once again, do you want justice or do you want answers? And it wasn't a difficult question for us. We've begged for answers all these years. The plea bargain was 1 count of child pornography in federal court. He would admit in court to kidnapping and molesting Jared and to kidnap and murdering Jacob, and he would show us where he was. We were told to tell no one because he was very volatile and he might change his mind. But the following morning, they went to the site with him, and they found Jacob's red hockey jacket. They found bones, teeth. They called us. We got to visit the site before all hell broke loose with the media. The media knew that was going on, and they let us have a moment to just see where this was going on, and then we had to call our kids. We told Trevor to come home from Colorado. One of the deputies stopped by our house that night, and he had brilliant words. He said, everything mattered. Everything mattered. Every piece of evidence that was collected at the beginning mattered. Every lead that was followed, every sighting, every suspect investigated. Everything that you do in these cases matters. Until you know, everything has to be done. The next day, everything fell apart. The bones they found weren't human. The teeth weren't human. The jacket didn't have his name on it. I was so afraid that the whole thing fell apart. They were supposed to interview the man that day at noon, and we didn't hear anything. About 11:30, I called the U.S. attorney on his cell phone and said, what's going on? And he didn't know. They didn't have the results yet. The next day, we didn't hear anything, and we could tell no one. Our siblings didn't know. Trevor came home. The next day, the BCA finally announced it to the world. September 5th was Labor Day, and we met with our kids and Aaron, who was with Jacob, as the sheriff told us what had happened that night. We now know that it was a very short time period. The man drove I'm going to let Shane and Chris, who are doing a breakout session, tell all of the details of how they made it happen. It was a pretty phenomenal thing that we were not part of, but to get the answers and to hear the details of how Jacob was killed. He was shot. And it was probably an hour and a half after he was kidnapped. All of these years, we waited, we searched. I kept saying, somebody knows something, and I really believe they didn't. This man never talked. He had brothers he didn't tell. He had a hard time. His life was a mess, but I don't believe that he knew. Trevor said two things that mattered to me. Jacob stopped this man from victimizing other kids, and Jacob wasn't ready to die. He still had things he needed to do, and that's been going on in Minnesota. The impact statements that our kids put together were amazing. Amy, I learned, she was 13, and when she got her license a few years later, she took on a role of being the chauffeur and getting everybody where they needed to be. She became adult-like very quickly. Trevor, when he wrote his impact statement last fall, it looked and sounded like a 10-year-old wrote it. His wife helped him finesse it to make it more public, but it was phenomenal to watch. Our kids went back. Carmen called me and said, I know I'm an adult. I know I've got children. I'm married. I have children, but part of me is 8 years old, and I want to be home with my mom and dad. The impact of these kids going back to that was amazing. Aaron, we just thought how brave he was. He was Jacob's best friend, and he was there for us all these years, but Aaron felt like the friend who abandoned Jacob. He ran away, and he lived with a tremendous amount of guilt and felt he had no worth. He was not worthy of love until he found his current wife. Jerry talked about the impact on his practice and the way people viewed him and living in a small community. All I kept saying is, you didn't need to kill him. This man let all of his other victims go. Why? Why did he kill him? He tried to say that he didn't want that to happen, and I just looked at him and said, you brought bullets. You can't walk away from that. If you didn't mean to shoot, you wouldn't have brought bullets. I have to say one thing that's going to be, it could impact you, it's impacting us. After a case is resolved, the entire case file will become public. Our county attorney was going to post the entire case online. This is a law that was passed in 1971 when you wanted, the case was open, but you'd go in an office and read through the paperwork. She was going to post it online, and I thought that's so unfair. People turned in their uncles, their brothers, their neighbors. If the entire file gets to be public and there's another case that happens, who is going to talk to police? Who's going to ever call knowing that it will be public? It will be announced. And that's a huge challenge that we're dealing with. It's not something that's gone away. The case isn't over when the child is found. There's much more that happens. They found, the second time they went digging, they found Jacob's soccer jersey with the number 11 on the back and Wetterling, his name on it. And are you able to click the next drive? The team wanted to put 11 on their jerseys for a tournament, so these girls called and asked if they could do that. Pretty soon, all of the sports in Minnesota, it's on Lake Wobegon Trail. Be kind, be positive, be honest. Keep going. The Twins did it. The Minnesota Vikings that actually invited us to the game when they played the Packers. It was a home game at the new stadium, and they dedicated it to Jacob. That's pretty phenomenal. The Minnesota Wild, Zach Parisi wears 11, and he's been such an ambassador for these 11 traits. Keep going. This was in a police station. I was going to do a training, and they had it all the way up the steps, all of these 11. To me, this is what are we fighting for. This is what Jacob stood for. Be fair, be kind, be understanding, be honest, be thankful, be a good sport, be a good friend. Be joyful, be generous, be gentle with others, and be positive. I believe that we all know what we're fighting against, but we also need to know what we're fighting for, and that's a part of it. You could turn the next. This is just, for me, this is what keeps kids out of trouble when they have a spark, when they are engaged in something. And I think as adults, we sometimes lose our spark. I did. Last fall, I sort of flatlined. It's like I couldn't motivate myself to go forward for a short while, but I knew that Jacob had believed in a world that was fair and honest and good, and we owe it to him to keep building on that. The next slide, please. The one question I get asked the most is, how is your family doing? And this was taken a year ago when we were all together. We were just all together again last week. But I am so incredibly proud. I just want to say 3 really short stories, and then I'll let everybody go. It's the kids that we're fighting for. Finn, the one who's in Trevor's holding in the corner, is 3. And he gets words and stuff mixed up. His brother plays Minecraft all the time. Finn calls it Minecrap. When he gets upset, he's like, and most people say, "Oh man," he goes, "Oh ma'am," and it's just delightful to listen to him talking. Izzy, who's standing in the very front, I was watching them one morning, and she just sat down. Everybody had gone on the bus, and she just looked at me and said, "Tell me, Grandma, what exactly do you do?" Oh, ma'am. It's a hard one to describe, but Maisie, who's in the corner, Maisie was talking about her grandfather. This was last fall. Her grandfather's from England, and he's so funny. He's a gazillion funny. He's the funniest man in the whole world. And she looked at me straight on and said, "You're a medium." But I know that's progress. I was so happy to be a medium. It is the kids that we're fighting for. I don't know where I'll be next, but I know that we have this world to fight for, where children have the right to grow up safe and follow their dreams. One of my favorite songs was written by a local musician who said, "There's a dream that we dream, how the world could be, where the children are safe, where the children are free. But we know if it's to happen, we must make it so. We are Jacob's hope, and we are Morgan's hope, and Adams and Tahare and all of the kids who are still missing, and the kids who are home safe today. We can build a world that's worthy of its children." On behalf of me and my family and my grandkids, we are so grateful for all that you do. Thank you.